we're a part of that thread of history that's going into this project, and we're breathing new life into it and bringing it up to modern day so that hopefully that historical thread will stay with it for much longer. And then we add a layer of that.
Welcome to Titans of Trade. I am your host, Constance Dunn, and today we welcome architect David Thompson, whose Los Angeles firm Assemblage is responsible for commercial and residential projects, some of which have been kind of catching fire in the States and California and well beyond. So we're going to talk about that today. So welcome, David.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So it's what I find really interesting is you are a California modernist, and your works tend to be focused in Southern California, but you have there's some awards we'll talk about, but they're not just in the US, there's AIA and whatnot, but they're also in Europe as well. And there's a lot of press. I was just reading an article, I think it was about Laurel Hills, and it was in an Architectural Digest France. So I'm kind of curious if you've thought about what is so kind of captivating about projects like Laurel or Wonderland Park?
Well, I think Southern California has always been, a marker of design throughout the world. There's always been a focus on it. There's some incredible things of, the lifestyle that we can have here, certainly as it relates to architecture and design. We can be outside 365 days a year. So it really lends a really incredible opportunity for the architecture to kind of engage with the landscape and things like that. So California has kind of always been on the radar in the world. And I think that we are, continuing a modernist sensibility that's been, cultivated here for many years. And I think we're just kind of carrying on that torch.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting about Laurel as well, Laurel Hills residence, because that has gotten just a lot of awards. So I think it's kind of beyond California being interesting kind of in Europe, globally or in Europe as well. These projects of yours, I mean, they've really kind of caught fire. And if you're being modest, don't. Is it because you've nailed like modernism in such a specific way?
I mean, sure. I think we have. I think we have nailed it. I think we continue to nail it. And in this particular project, I just think it resonates with a lot of people. I think what there's a warmness to this place. There's a special. I'm sitting here in the Laurel Hills residence now, and on the site, and there's something very special about the place. There's something special about that just resonates. It's got a warm quality to it. All of our work, we consider it to kind of be a warm modernism. So I think it's quite accessible to people. People understand it. It's not. It just resonates with them. And I think when you come here and you kind of are engaged in the natural environment and the openness of the plan, and these doors behind me and the doors in front of me all kind of open up, and you're really kind of seamlessly spilling into the landscape. I think that really resonates. And then the material palette here, it's very warm, it's very accessible. And I think the architecture here really takes the user and then the people component of architecture really seriously. And so I think that because that is sort of a driving force of a lot of the work that we do, I think it resonates with people.
Right. And there's something about, let's say, Laurel Hills or Wonderland, or actually Fryman Canyon, I can't wait to talk about. That's a fascinating project. But perhaps they're using this as a template for how to do this themselves or to glean ideas, because you're not just doing modernism, California modernism, you're also doing it like there's a lot of emphasis on like your materials, like sustainable materials. So I guess that's probably very evocative and interesting to people. Is that like a big part of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think materiality is an important piece. And like I said before, we try and bring a kind of warm modernism to it, where there's materials that are tactile and they resonate with the human spirit, and they're warm and natural and things like that. So there is that, while certainly here in Southern California, our projects are really engaging with the landscape. The
Right.
materiality is also engaging with the landscape too, and it just feels very natural. And the houses and things feel really rooted in their site and really part of the landscape, and not so much like a building set on land, but a building that really becomes part of the landscape and part of the site.
I'm curious about your mid-century modernism connection because I see
Mm-hmm.
in your works that you really, really seem to have a really profound understanding of it, and you're able to take it to build upon it chapters and chapters and in a very modern way, but in a way that's really, really is honest to the premises. You're not doing something that goes, where the finished product is like, oh, I can see where there was some work done, or I can see where the real house was, and then they've kind of added some jazz. So I'm curious about like your background. You're an LA native, so probably that has something to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't born here, but I've been here since
Mm-hmm.
I was like 4 years old. So as far
Uh-huh.
as everybody's concerned, I'm a Los Angeles native. I grew up on the Sunset Strip in West Hollywood, so like right in the thick of it. My father's an architect, and he had his own practice as when I was a young kid. So architecture's kind of been in my blood since I was quite young, and um, so that, I was certainly, when I discovered that architecture was something that I wanted to be a part of, the California history and California modernism is something that was really influential to me. And, you know, I had visited some of the early California. My father's partner owned a Schindler house, the Howe House in Silver Lake, that I used to go to sleepovers at when I was a kid. So there was this sort of like this kind of subtle, uh, subtle kind of um, fiber that was through my body that I didn't even really know was kind of happening, because it was kind of happening subtly in the background. And then as I discovered architecture as something that I wanted to do and be a part of, it was very easy to kind of like come back to the roots of Southern California as a means of inspiration and a means of where I could kind of focus myself as I learned more about what was interesting to me in architecture. And so the California modernist became a very, a sort of root of what has developed me as my own sensibility as an architect.
And it's interesting because you went to Tulane for your undergraduate and master's. So I'm curious about like your training there. Like that's
Yeah.
an interesting choice. Like how was that molded there?
Oh, I mean, it's such a fantastic place. I mean, New Orleans is still to this day one of my favorite places on the planet, and it's very inspirational. I mean, it's obviously a very historic city. So the fabric is, it's got, a very rich and dark and beautiful history to it. And being in school there was kind of interesting to kind of be in the backdrop of this very historical city and being a part of this school of architecture that was really progressive thinking and things like that. So the contrast of those two things against each other was really an incredible breeding ground for really amazing ideas and thought process. And it taught me a lot, and it really formed me into who I am as a human and as an architect. But it was also like getting away from California too. Like it was like, I think in hindsight, I didn't quite know that when I was doing that. But when I left to go away, I was, because I grew up in California, I thought everything was centered around California. And so getting away and meeting other people from other, cultures and backgrounds and locations and things like that were all kind of, really fueling me as a human and then subsequently as an architect. But those experiences were profound for me.
No doubt. And I'm curious when you have a project where you have a bona fide mid century structure and you are charged with expanding it, with making it modern. How do you do that? How do you kind of dig into its roots and then build upon them. Again, doing it faithfully in that way you seem to be able to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question because every project sort of delivers a little bit of a different, set of ingredients for it, right? I mean, we're not necessarily doing, meticulous restorations of these projects. We are doing renovations and things to those projects. So they sort of call for a little bit of a different methodology, if you will, in the way we approach them because. We look at these things, we look at these projects, we look at them for their history. We're inspired by them, by their history and what they were, what they were looking to accomplish in their day. And then we are looking to kind of revive them and bring them into a modern day for our clients and whatever their particular requirements are. So, we sit with these projects for a while. We're inspired by them. We let them inform us as to what needs to be done. I mean, obviously, like I said, we're not meticulously restoring them as though it's a recreation of that. We're trying to bring it into its modern day and trying to think what those architects and designers were trying to encapsulate in their projects then, and trying to use that thread as a way in which we approach the projects today.
I love the thread. So it's almost like it could be like an actor's technique in a sense. Like where
Sure.
you step into the character's shoes in a way.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to bring our own sensibility, and
Right.
we understand that our role in the history of these projects is also different, right?
Right.
Like I said, it's different. I think it is different to kind of to compartmentalize them, to say, here's a restoration project of a, like some project that is, that somebody is saying, like, I want to meticulously restore it and bring it back to what it was when it was built. It's different than a renovation or addition to a historic or mid-century place. So we are trying to put ourselves back into the shoes of the designers and architects of the time, but we realize also that we're a part of that thread of history that's going into this project, and we're breathing new life into it and bringing it up to modern day, so that hopefully that historical thread will stay with it for much longer, and then we add a layer of that history to the project and to the place. And
Yeah, I'm curious because you live in one of your most notable projects, the Laurel Hill residence. And I'm curious about taking risks and if there's something in there that you were like, this could be interesting or not. But that maybe worked out really well because you're living in there, right? And I imagine it was built in a sense like a custom suit. It must have been very interesting. But back to the question was, again, I'm kind of rambling, but the idea of a risk, something exciting that you were able to do because you were the client in this case.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, there's inherent risk in embarking on any architectural project, whether you're the client, you're the architect. There's just there are challenges. And so we by being the client, it allowed us, I guess, some freedom, although our clients allow us quite a bit of freedom, actually. I would say that there was a different type of obsessiveness about designing my own house than I mean, there's an obsessiveness with all of our projects that I encapsulate myself in all of our projects in some way. But this one was hard to put down, at bedtime and stuff like that. It's hard to put it down. So that was an interesting component of it, where it's kind of a nonstop thinking about it. And but as far as risks are concerned, like I said, it's a risk to take on a project like this inherently, just in general. And so I don't know that I think that everything we were doing here was so painstakingly thought about that, like, at a certain point we had kind of mitigated the risks, if you will. So I don't come to the other side of it going like, oh man, I wish I had done that, or I wish I had done this. It's more of a place of like, uh, beautiful surprises or things like that. Like, you know, we thought about everything, but then all of a sudden you're kind of looking, you're like, oh, that's a really beautiful view of that tree, or that's a, you know, that window now frames some really abstract, beautiful view that maybe you didn't understand. So, you know, these things are just like all of our projects. They are works in progress for us to learn, and we're in a constant, as architects, we're on a constant learning process. We learn from everything. We learn from every step we make, and every project we're a part of, and every client, and every problem that we're solving in every project. So it's a continual learning process. I think that's the beauty of the medium of architecture, is that as architects, we never stop learning. We keep learning from the last thing we did and the last challenge that we were faced with or whatever. So it's kind of a really beautiful growth process as an artist and as a human and as an architect.
Yeah, and I'm curious, just being in this work in your home, is there something that, like, just about every day or regularly, you're like, that's great. I'm so happy I did that. Or something that's particularly user friendly? Because I know pragmatism is a big part of your work. I know that's like
Mhm.
something that you guys talk about a lot at Assemblage, like being
Yeah.
very pragmatic.
Yeah, I mean, these projects need to work. You know, they need to, you know, when we solve problems as architects, we are solving problems for users and for people, right? And at the end of the day, it has to serve those purposes. As beautiful as it, you know, to me, the most successful architecture hits on all of those points. It's not just beautiful, it's not just pragmatic, it's all of those things. And that's when, to me, it really sings. And so it has to work. It has to work for the users. And in the case of a house, you know, it has to do all the things that you need for daily living. And this house is for a family of four, and it's, you know, it's working every day. It's working, you know, it's working for a family, and that, you know, has to go through the motions of living that, you know, and in some ways the architecture is a backdrop for that. It wants to function and do all the things that it needs to do to serve the purposes of living. And then at the same time, if it can be inspiring and maybe a subtle inspiration, you know, like walking from the bedrooms to the kitchen, you're passing through a bunch of glass walls that have, you know, landscape around you. You feel like you're walking outside. And I think if there's sort of a subtle engagement with nature on a daily basis that just kind of happens, that I think inspires you as a human. Like, I can see it in watching my kids and just sort of seeing them. You know, I grew up in a house that my father designed, and, you know, maybe in the moment I didn't understand the sort of power of that, but later in my life I understood that, like, being in environments that are designed and well thought of and inspiring just kind of inspire you throughout your life and whatever you're doing. So, um, you know, but it has to do both. It has to do all those things, right? Like I
Right.
said before, I think in order for it to be really successful, it has to fire on all those cylinders.
Yeah, here's kind of a funny DIY question. I love the idea of what you're saying about interacting with nature, you know, on the regular, just, you know,
Yeah.
in the course of living in your home. And for someone who doesn't have a custom home or maybe is in an apartment or something, what's kind of like a way that they could do that? I know this is a strange question, but I always just love kind of tips and tricks from people who do this all day.
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing, and you might not be able to change these things, but natural light is certainly a key component, right? Like,
Mm,
the more natural light we can invite into the spaces, I think the better. I mean, we're fueled
right.
by sunlight, and those things are great. So,
Yeah.
um, but you know, you might not have some of the opportunities if you're not living in a custom home, but you can
Right.
surround yourself with design. I mean, design is everywhere, and well thought out things,
Hmm.
products, furniture, architecture. I mean, design goes into so many things, and it's so important. And
Mm-hmm.
you can tell the things that are really well designed and have really, great minds putting thought into them from,
Right.
everything. And so,
Yeah.
I think it doesn't just have to be architecture, but like
Mm.
just items in general that surround or you work with every day, or things that are part of your living experience or your working
Mm.
experience. There's a lot of really smart and talented people out there putting lots of thought into these
Mm.
things, and you can
Yeah.
surround yourself with that. And I think that will help to inspire you in other ways to decide that well-designed things or homes or whatever it is
Mm-hmm.
that is enveloped your life is important.
That's a good point. So even starting small, like getting a beautiful pen that appeals to you, and
Sure.
that could potentially layer onto other things like, okay, maybe I'm going to change up my desk and then add other things. And then lo and
Sure.
behold, you're surrounded by excellent design.
Absolutely. And then
um,
I think the
yeah,
more you get involved in that, you realize and you look around in the world that everything is like that. I mean,
right.
cities. I mean, think about cities' infrastructures and things like that as you move along. And when you run into something that isn't well designed, and it's
Right.
kind of like sometimes really good design should go almost unnoticed,
Okay. All
right?
right.
It should be very subtle in some ways.
Uh-huh.
It can be very impactful and very much in your face, but it can also be
Mm.
like just design that just kind of goes and subtly finds its way, and it works. That really works,
Uh-huh.
and you're not sure why.
Uh-huh. So so part of that is training your eye, kind of being conscious about what you're looking at and perhaps like deconstructing. Oh, I like this because, and then
Yeah,
perhaps, okay. So what
I
are
think
so
deconstructing is a great way to put it.
okay, so what things have trained your eye besides sleeping in mid-century homes, living in a home, being raised by an architect? What were some things that were really pivotal to kind of training your eye or building your aesthetic even?
um I mean, I think the greatest thing that has been my teacher is time. Just time. You just I look back, I've been kind of looking back at some of the older work that, kind of got me where I'm going. And it's very different than what I'm doing now. And I think it's just time. I think I've just evolved as a human and as a artist and an architect. And um, just I've learned a lot over the years by doing. I've been doing this for a very long time. And so um, I want to say that what has inspired me hasn't changed, but I have learned a lot on my path, and that is what has informed me and inspired me and shifted gears for me in many ways. And so, I think that the greatest thing for uh, artists and architects are time. It's just you're learning every place that you go. All the traveling I've done, all the architecture that I've visited, and all the people that I've spoke to, and all the interactions with humans that help to inform me. I mean, because at the end of the day, we as architects, we're designing buildings for people. We're not designing buildings for buildings. We're designing buildings for people. They're there for people to inhabit. And every form that there is, every building type out there, we're designing for people. So we have to understand people and how they interact with the world, and how they, in case of residential work, as I said before, how they live. What is it that, and in some ways, then when we interact with a client to do the work for like a residential project, everybody does many of the similar things in living in a house, but there may be unique things for everybody. So listening to them and sort of discerning from them what is unique for them in their life and what they need, and then how can we turn that into an architectural statement or vernacular, or use design to interpret that in architectural terms.
Right.
But we need to learn and understand people,
Uh-huh.
human, and understanding them, and what we need and how we live is probably the most inspirational part of our process.
Yeah, you have to have an understanding of humans. And I imagine that requires, it's important for you when you're meeting with clients and doing residential or commercial work, that you basically, you have to bring your experience and tell them perhaps it's something that runs contrary to what they want. Or you have to put forth, well, hey, I just want to let you know that, things that are unforeseen for people who are not architects. Is that something you have to do a lot? Is that easy, or how do you do it?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I suppose it depends on the person that we're interacting with, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm fortunate to say that, all of the people that have come to us they're coming to us for our expertise and for our, what we've done. And, I'm fortunate that the people that we have been, fortunate to work with over the years and doing our projects believe that what we do has great value, and that architects have a purpose and a reason, and their methodology of thinking and their critical thinking skills and problem solving skills are important in solving their problems of whatever they are asking us to design. So it depends on who the people are, but often they are looking for us to kind of help define that. And then if they come with something that may be contradictory of that, then it creates discourse, dialogue about what it is. And then because of our expertise, we might be able to kind of unpack that. We might learn something very new about that as well, but we will also maybe be able to unpack it in a way that most people don't have all of the layers of thinking that goes into something, because we're thinking about the design, but there are many, many, many other layers that we are thinking about in order to execute a project, because there's lots of things that go into actually making these things happen.
Right, right. And you have this secret knowledge. Like, for instance, if you are remodeling a mid-century home, there are going to perhaps be some unforeseen challenges.
Sure.
And I was curious, are there a few that you have run into over and over again, or like general
we run
areas?
into them on every project that we were involved in, of course. I mean, and in the mid-century example, there's always the challenges of the way things were built back in the day and
Right.
the way they're built now. And many of those mid-century houses, you couldn't build them the same way now, just because of construction methods and from energy codes and, just the different types of things that go into these projects. You just can't build them that way anymore. So, often assemblies get thicker, things like that, in order to accommodate energy and insulation or things like that, or stuff like that. So there's always challenges with trying to, incorporate the modern day requirements onto something that is, 50 or 60 or 70 years old, and trying to maintain the sensibility and the character or the detailing or things like that. So we're challenged by that, but it also is, we welcome the challenge. It makes it fun and keeps us on our toes for sure.
Exactly. And I know sustainability is like a big part of your mission, or your firm's mission. And just for defining that, what does that mean for you guys?
I mean, I think sustainability means for us that, we have a responsibility as architects that are manipulating the built environment and manipulating the natural environment, to be conscious of how we step through the world. So we want to be very respectful when we place a structure on the land. We hold the land to be very sacred and special. We want to do that in a manner that we feel like, these buildings can work and be workhorses in sustainability. So if they're designed properly and utilize sustainable technologies, they can kind of give back to the land, which is, you know, kind of a very Native American philosophy, if you will, like be respectful of the land and give back to the land. So I think we try and employ whatever kind of sustainability measures we can. We sort of have a benchmark of what we do, and we encourage our clients to go further if we can. Um, so we just feel that there's a ultimate responsibility that we have because of the kind of work we do.
Right, right. Do you have a kind of material that you've used kind of recently or that you use quite a bit that you're particularly fond?
Like not a specific material. I think it's more of a continual. Uh, we try and take a thread through the whole project and think of it from a sustainability perspective. So we use kind of a sustainable thinking in our approach to all levels of design, both in the early design stages as well as in the material selections and things like that. So we try and use it as a continual thread.
Right. And it's interesting thinking about the architects, the famous mid-century, and I'm a big Neutra person, but and their writings and philosophically, the ideas that really were the engine behind the product, right?
Yeah.
Behind their design. And I'm curious, you obviously work in the vein of modernism in California, and I'm curious which one of, like, philosophically, if there's, certain ideas or philosophies that really square with you personally.
I mean, I think the mid-century modern philosophies that really we're tied into. There's certainly the just a new way of thinking, of living, certainly as it relates to residential. I just think that these, the connectivity with nature, the indoor outdoor living, especially as it relates to Southern California. As I
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, the idea that we can be outside 365 days a year.
Yeah.
We really look for the architecture to blur that line between indoor and outdoor and let your daily living experience be pushed to the outside,
Right.
so that we can just kind of be in nature and connect with nature. And so I think that's a real, thread from the mid-century modernists like Neutra and Schindler and those guys.
Right.
And then, I think kind of stripping everything down to a sort of simplicity, and being really true to the materials and things like that. I think were threads that we're certainly inspired by and trying to carry on from the
Yeah.
mid-century modernists.
And talking to you, it makes sense how your firm does residential and commercial as well. I don't see that all the time. And it's
Yeah.
interesting, you're able to toggle between those two.
Yeah, I mean, they're different animals, no doubt.
Right.
But and they're different types of projects that have different types of constraints and problems to solve and so on. And in our case, we do a lot of hospitality, so with the restaurants we do, what we're trying to do with those is really bring a residential vibe to them. We are trying for the patron to kind of create this residential experience, if you will, and that's really kind of related to materiality and warmth and, like a sort of very tactile nature to it and a comfortability in the experience when you're out and about, and and having a sensory experience with food. I think we're trying to bring a very detail oriented and warm tactile experience to those spaces.
Well, that's interesting, and it's an interesting choice. And when was it that you decided we're going to do commercial as well, or maybe it went the other way? We're doing it.
Yeah, no, I wish I could say I was very deliberate about that. It was very much like it just kind of happened, which is kind of the nature of architecture. I think there's some people that have been able to be very specific. I think for me, the opportunities that presented themselves, we chased them and they took us down a path. And
Nice.
that's just sort of been the nature of the way my career kind of developed. And so I didn't set out to be a restaurant architect, but the opportunities presented themselves and we took advantage of them and ran with it. And then here we are today. So we'll see what opportunities present themselves tomorrow, and we will embrace them and run with them in the same method we did before.
So could the case study program in your native Los Angeles,
Yes.
could that be done today?
I mean, you'd have to have some pretty big, deep pockets to do that.
Right.
Because John and Tenza basically financed all those houses that they were building. So if you had a big benefactor that could do it, I suppose you could. But I think if you kind of read into the history of it, after a while, it sort of became too expensive to do. So I think in spirit, I think you could do that, and I think it's been tried before in other places. I think the time that was happening, where we were and post-war, and the sensibility of the 50s that was really kind of looking for all of these modern conveniences of life that were sort of different. I think that was all right for that. So I don't think that there isn't that same kind of sensibility now. Whether it could exist again, I think there could be in some kind of capacity. I think there could be. Like I said, I think you'd have to have a pretty big benefactor. You'd have to have somebody with pretty deep pockets.
Yeah, and the canvas was so perfect because you're talking about location, you're talking about culture, socially, and then these talents swirling around that were just ready to bust out and kind of just. So yeah, I agree. It would be something different. Speaking of your firm, Assemblage, you guys are headquartered on Sunset Boulevard. Is that right?
That's correct.
I find that very fascinating. I'm curious about that location and why you're like, boom, that's where we're setting up shop. And that's where we're staying.
I grew up in West Hollywood on the Sunset Strip. So I grew up between the Whiskey A Go-Go and the Roxy, one block off of Sunset. So the Sunset Strip has been my stomping ground since I was a little kid. So in that way, it's quite fitting. I think, Hollywood to me has just been it's been my developmental playground for my whole life. So it's kind of perfect that we're, smack dab in the middle of Hollywood. And I think that was just something that, I don't know how specifically deliberate it was, but it was, as I kind of looked for a home for Assemblage, it's sort of like all the pieces fell into place and it made sense for us to be there. The office space we're in is really quite awesome, and it's very central. And I think it's just it's where I I developed into a human and into an architect, and it just sort of it's perfectly fitting for what we're doing.
Right, it's like someone opening up their store on Main Street in their hometown.
Yeah. Sunset
Yeah.
Boulevard is my proverbial Main Street.
So there's a certain glamour or a certain Hollywood, I guess, aesthetic or influence maybe. Does that find its way into your work in some kind of way?
I suppose just doing work in Los Angeles is fairly glamorous, and and there's certainly opportunities for that. But I think what we're trying to do is not necessarily highlight the glamour of Los Angeles, but highlight the beauty of Los Angeles. I think Los Angeles is viewed by the rest of the world as, this, the Hollywood kind of scene. And while that's an important piece and we embrace it and we support it and are happy that it's happening here, there's also so many other things going on here that are really profound. There's, the culinary world is amazing. The art world is amazing. The music world is amazing. There's so many incredible things going on in Los Angeles. And I think if anything, we are looking to highlight that glamour of Los Angeles as much
Ah,
as the Hollywood glamour of it, right? The
right.
Hollywood glamour may have a little bit more of the outreach to the world and brings a focus to Los Angeles that is
Right.
global. And I love it for that. And I so embrace everything that comes out of Hollywood and that. But Hollywood, LA is a pioneering place for all kinds of arts and incredible thinkers and people here that have really shaped the world and in that way, that's what I think we're trying to celebrate about LA as well.
The house you grew up in, your father created it. Was it a modernist home, the style?
No, it was a remodel that he did to a house that we bought um, in 1973, I think. And, he remodeled it and we did an addition on it. And it was, it was very, it was modern it was kind of a wood shingled house on the outside with, casement windows and things like that on it. So it wasn't very modern in its exterior form, but then he added a couple pieces that had these like, very 60s and 70s kinds of modern flares to it. Lots of super graphics on the walls and of
Ah,
primary colors. And my bedroom, I lived in a loft that was kind of up in my room was an addition that he added on with my bedroom had a loft in it with windows that looked out onto the Hollywood Hills. So,
oh,
it wasn't necessarily modernist in flavor, but it definitely had modern sensibilities for the time of where my dad's sensibilities came from and thinking came from
yeah,
in his journey in architecture. So it
yeah.
was super inspiring. It was an incredible place to be as a young person, and I think set me up for um, the life that I'm living, both as an artist and architect and as a person. So it was a great foundation.
Yeah, it makes sense. You are really steeped in this world and your work reflects that.
I would like to think that our work is very honest and true
Right.
um, to its where we began, where it comes
Oh,
from, and where we are, and who we are, and what we're doing. I think it's very
yeah.
true and honest.